I grew up playing games, so it's always been in my it's always been in my life since I can remember. Being interested in games. I actually wanted to make games quite early on. So this is 0.01. So this is the first build I ever made. It still says where the goats are, but this is officially the first build of Stillness. I'm not actually sure what to expect. Okay, so there's camera. The camera is kind of more zoomed out.
I don't want to lose track of my days. I think I'm on day 3. It's quite nice, like, so remember what you filled your day with. Day 1, made cheese. Day 2, made an egg and cheese pie. I met the mailman. I haven't got a basket. Mushrooms, I think. Well, I know what I'm doing day 4.
Memory of God. So that's my Twitter account. So this is how it started. It was a game idea that I had that I was going to call Memory of God. And I guess this is where it started. I don't know what it was going to be at this point. 7 chapters of 7 minutes each. At this point I was like, okay, I need to make a game and I need to finish it, because I had not finished a game by this point. Before I had made The Entertainer, actually I didn't have any coding experience, so this was me just getting to grips with coding and computer science and all that stuff. Because the whole time, whenever I thought about video games and making video games, the idea of programming and coding always stopped me, and I always thought that, you know, if you can't program or you can't code, you can't make video games. I had been messing around with Unity and Game Maker a little bit when I was studying architecture. So I took about a month off work and I did a programming course. And I think I got halfway through the course when I was like, oh, I probably know enough to actually make a game now. So I made The Entertainer. So The Entertainer was the first game that I made. I messed around with Unity. I made a few prototypes before this. But this was the first finished game that I made, and the concept was you're a busker and you have to busk for coins whilst avoiding the police.
This is bungle brought. Looks just about ready to go in the basket. I think there was something here to harvest if I wasn't mistaken. Journeyman's foil.
When you're bug fixing, most of the time is spent actually finding what's wrong. So there are some bugs that the fix is really actually quite easy, but the challenge is actually replicating that bug, because you can't replicate the behavior that people are reporting, and those are the tricky ones. I remember when I was like maybe 11 or 12, my dad brought home a copy of Flash, and me and my brother tried to make games, and that was when we realized it was really hard to make games. Okay, so it looks like the first thing I did was the camera, like introducing the camera. So immediately you just feel like there's more space around you, which is quite interesting. I think the fizzle I got was I got a few Mega Man sprites and made them, flip them when you press left and right. I think you could jump. And that's as far as I got, and I realized, like, I think at that point I realized I couldn't make games. It's like, it's too hard. It's too much programming. Like the coding side of things, I just could not get my head around. So this game was made in a month. A lot of the things that I did before this were kind of just atmospheres that you could experience, right? They weren't a game. There was no I don't want to say objective, but there was very limited interactivity. I think initially dancing was going to be one of the mechanics of the game, but then in the Entertainer it turned into the only mechanic of the game. I'll go too crazy. There was publishers involved, there was investors involved, so all of a sudden the stakes were a lot higher. You know, you're going to be charging money in a marketplace, so the consumers are going to expect more from it. 0.12. Whoa! Okay, so this, I guess you're beginning to see the concept of inside the house, which you couldn't see.
We've got 2 houses now, 2 buildings now.
Yeah, we got 2. So it's progressed quite a lot. So you got the new models in, the new house model. I guess like just for people to feel something, because I think it's rare, for me at least in video games, to feel emotionally connected to a character and what's happening to them in the game.
Oh, so those are the shoe rocks. Bugger. Oh, bugger, what have I done? Been out too late.
The only game that's actually, as far as I can remember, actually done that is Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, which like blew me away when I played it. And it actually, thinking about it, it has a very similar dynamic in the sense that it starts off one way and it almost I mean it is, you know, puzzles and adventure, but it's not about that, you know. It's about the ending, the finale, and the finale puts everything else into context, right? And it's clear then, oh, all of that stuff, you know, it got you to where you were, but it wasn't about that stuff. It was you know, it has a much greater message to tell than just, you know, just going on a random adventure.
Oh no, I can't see. It's too dark. Here we go.
The way that they channeled that emotion through the actual physical input of the game in a way that you're not even conscious about, that was very impressive to me.
Nice. That was really successful. I'm really happy with that. And now, to enjoy the feast.
And I felt connected to those characters in a way that I don't think I've ever connected to any character in films or books, you know. So that was the moment I was like, all right, this is what games can do. I wouldn't say that was the intention of this game, but it was definitely one of the reasons why I strongly considered moving into video games. You know, that was one of the inspirations for me to say, oh yeah, I want to make games like that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, so now it takes 10 squares, whereas before I think it took 13 or something like that. So that's our first bug fixed. This definitely turned into the Entertainer, because this is the kind of town squares I was thinking about, and the Entertainer obviously was just kind of that much with a little statue in the middle. So I think there was a process of getting to a certain point with this idea, and then realizing it's too big for me to handle right now. So it scaled down to the level of the Entertainer. This game was the first one where it was like, okay, if you have to reduce scope so much in order to actually finish a game. And even this, you know, when I had this idea, I thought, there's no way this is going to take me a month. You know, there's nothing to it. But, you know, it did take a month, and I really rushed to get it finished as well. It didn't finish. And I think there's a lot of bugs in here as well. The shrine is still there. There's some weird stuff going on. There's like a shadow, some bright shadow. So this is really kind of in the thick of it, you know. A lot has changed, but a lot is broken. Oh. So this is like, I guess it's the first kind of prototype of inside, outside, which doesn't sound like a massive deal, but, you know, oops. Yeah, obviously not. There's always a lot of things that you have to do, so it's very hard to switch off, and it's really difficult to kind of design the game and implement the game and you know, work out the code and make it look pretty, and you know, your brain is like jumping from task to task, and each one requires a different side of your brain.
Oh. It mentions she had some seeds in her pocket. I know what's going to happen. Oh, I've only got 2 seeds.
I think the bigger the possibility space gets, the more chance a player has of not engaging with something.
Oh yeah.
So I didn't want to give so much freedom that the narrative is completely missed. It's still possible, but I think it is really, really unlikely that someone misses every single piece of narrative, including the merchant.
Interessant. All these little stories of cities once existed. Sort of building the world for you, isn't it?
Yeah, these are more sketches for... You can start to see how here the final design is coming out. But it's mostly just looking at patterns, shapes and patterns. I think she's actually gardening in this sketch. Here she's like looking at a little plant, interacting with a goat here. And she's watering the plant. You've got a new Talma model, which is... I think it's the right model, but the animations are completely different.
The greater narrative of the world ending, that of everything that would have to go in the letters, I found that, relatively speaking, the least interesting. Where the space that we could use to draw character and refer to relationships and even fun turns of phrase to write. All of that, because I found that more interesting, I wanted to make sure that had most of the space. Really.
But I think that maps very well to the game as well, like focusing on the other stuff. So I think that's quite very interesting. The fact that you approach it that way as well. The with the least interest in the actual story, and you know, the more interest in everything else. This is just some ideas for mechanics based on distance from characters. That's definitely the character that we see in The Entertainer, with the jacket and the beard and the top heavy. No. I really enjoyed this transition. That's just like instant, you know, you're just in jail and everything goes black. And so this is where the kind of simplicity of where the goats are came from, you know, with the models. And you know, this is a town square, but the only thing that it lets you know that is a clock and a statue. Bring me my mail! Because
it gets to a point where I've got to a point where I'm kind of just waiting for my news. because I don't want to like do any of the plants or anything. This is all I have left. We're gonna go over here. Forget it. I'm just gonna.
She's
Yeah.
walking around really slowly. There's not much to do. Again, it's sparse. And even when you get letters from your family, it's also sparse because there's probably a million things happening in their lives that you don't know about.
Usually what I did was I would separate things into days. So like today I'm doing art, today I'm doing, design, today I'm doing code, whatever. And that helped to kind of structure it a little bit. But there are some days where you have to do a bit of everything. But the flip side to that as well is you have control over everything. You see all of this, I imagined the actual farm to be a lot bigger than it ended up being.
Why is that?
Just because there's no reason to have it that big.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed, and I didn't ask you to do it, but I was pleasantly surprised when I saw it, is there was a lot of humour in the merchant's dialogue, which is, it's not a humorous game.
Right, he's colorful. His dress, even the way he walked, right, he kind of waddles. Even though he's quite, stout stylistically, because of this giant thing on his back, it looks like he really wobbles around.
Yeah.
And it's, something about the way he moved was already kind of funny to me.
So the first bug is filling up the pail with goat's milk feels a few taps too long. So the fix for this is quite an easy one. So I just need to go to the goat prefab and change a value from 10 to 13. And we save that, and that's that bug fixed. Yeah, so I guess I've finished Entertainer by this point. So this is the initial ideas for the next game, and some of these might be familiar. So I think these sketches are actually bang on, even Stillness, what Stillness ended up looking like.
Astronomer's beard. I love the name of these shrooms. Pixie house. Bumblebrought. Wanderer's feast. It's quite apt. I went that way and picked up the Wanderer's feast last, isn't it? We're going home.
Should have put geese in my game. I hate geese. Most mainstream games put you in the center of action. The whole story revolves around you. So I just wanted to really experiment with another option. Can you have an engaging narrative where you're not the center of the narrative, right? And there's two narratives in the game. There's one, the kind of explicit narrative that develops over time, but also, on the farm itself, the player choosing to do various things and whatever happens on the farm, even though it's not written into the game, into the story, it is a narrative that the player is acting out. The granddaddy of challenges, right, in video games is that connection between gameplay and narrative. I think, in a way, Stillness was my attempt at avoiding question, right? Because the narrative just happens somewhere else, and the gameplay happens on the farm. So I purposely kept them separate as a kind of design point. Maybe subconsciously, because I couldn't figure out how to actually weave them together appropriately, right? Because Stillness has that kind of sandbox-like gameplay, but it also has a very linear narrative. And it's funny because I started from where the goats are. I think it felt like I was quite far along very early on because the game was, you could play it. But I think at this point, when I had started to put all the new stuff in, I had started to change the mechanics. I think at this point I was like, oh god, this is so far away from where I need to be. So his movement speed decreases as you get hungrier. In hindsight, I could have probably signaled that a bit better. But this is definitely where my kind of interest in less than happy... Oh. No. And then the people don't even notice you. When the game is free, it makes it a lot easier for you to experiment with these kinds of things. If you're releasing a commercial product, which is so hard, you literally can't do anything. You just die if you try to move, and there's no way you can progress. Obviously, that's going to be a bit more problematic because people have paid money and they expect something. Little houses, little rundown houses, which again look like Talma's house. Got a little guy with an umbrella here. Not sure what that's about. I think these just are random sketches. I think if you go into it thinking, the only thing I'm going to do is try and do something that's fun and enjoyable, I think you immediately kind of reduce the scope of what, the possibility space. I liked playing games. I like the visuals of games, but actually writing code was just, it seemed like an impossibility for my 11-year-old brain. So I forgot about it for a while. And going through school, I like to draw manga and stuff. And I thought that, well, if I can't make games, I can make art for games. So that was my intention for a while, to be a concept artist or a character artist, even an animator. Here's the merchant. I think this is the first sketch of him. And there's a sketch of the house here, which looks very similar to how it ended up. The layout changed. As you can see, I imagined the goats to be behind the house. But that didn't work because, when the goats go actually behind the house, you can't, they're obstructed a lot of the time.
It's quite nice that you're forced to work with the sun. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's no point being outside. It's not like everything is easy to do in the dark. You're kind of forced to take her to bed.
We're not even exactly sure, right? How much time passes between the time that we see her go to bed and then the next time we see her wake up. You imagine her growing old, and you imagine everyone just staying as they are in her mind because that's how she remembers them.
I didn't start out with an idea. I just started out with, I'm gonna make a game where you are this old lady and you have goats. It wasn't supposed to be a game with gameplay. It was just supposed to be, an experience, I guess. So there's Tikva stirring the goat, stirring the milk. And here you can see a little sketch of the house with the cheese maker to the side of it, which is how it appeared in where the goats are. You got a little heart and some cheese here. So now it has the camera. It has the different houses, which these are, I think, basically the final models. You know.
Yeah.
Especially like these houses and this wall, I think doesn't change actually. It's a weird little wall there. When I initially started working on the idea that turned into Stillness, I wanted to get away from it all. You know, I felt like living in London, it was just all a bit too much. You know, everything was happening and I just wanted to get away from it. And I think the game is a reflection of that.
See what our plants are up to. Oh, nice. Let's get the basket and harvest. Gourd. More gourd. It's good to have a few days collecting things just in case that guy comes back. I'm gonna get some eggs.
So we got some more, got animations. Yeah. Changed a little bit, but not much. Okay, no, this is weird because the menu screen is showing, and it shouldn't, but we don't have an error. That's strange because the code is saying there's no problems. But the game isn't behaving like it should. I don't know what. I mean, this is tough because if an error pops up, the code is saying I got to this point and I couldn't do something, so you can go and investigate. But something like this, there's no error, so the problem could be anywhere, right? So where do you even start? When I was making Where the Goats Are, it was a lot more interesting and I didn't want to stop working on it, so I just kept working on it. And it was about 2 weeks before I released Where the Goats Are. I actually quit my job in architecture because I just had a feeling that, number one, that I was enjoying video games so much, and I was actually able to create games. So I just started building it. And as I was building it, the more kind of interesting it got, and the more ideas I had. And I was developing, putting narrative in the game, music, like progression, a beginning and end, all that stuff. If I remember correctly, there is a way to avoid him. Because something... So this is really interesting, like these little, these three images kind of almost look like how the game ended up, even though I had no idea how it was going to end up at this point. So that's that one. I kind of want to check this one. I'm so glad I kept all these builds now.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to go back in. Oh. So now I've put in the fences. I've put in this like flower garden. And it's still bugging out. So that's the sky. So there's sky all around 360, but the camera actually only points one direction. So in a traditional game where you can move around, you would have these lining up, so you can't tell where the seams are.
Yeah.
But because it ended up, I realised that actually you will only ever see that one bit. That's why they don't match up. It's more like a stage set, so that it only makes sense when viewed from this specific angle.
Yeah.
If you rotated the camera even 5 degrees to the left or to the right, you would immediately see that it just stops. I like the idea of thinking about video games as theatre, where the players are the actors in the theatre.
Yeah.
So they're like essentially performing on stage for themselves. They're like watching themselves perform. But like you said, it has to be within a controlled environment which has enough freedom for the player to feel like they're making their own decisions, but at the same time everything they do goes with the flow of the narrative.
Do you know what? I don't even know where I'm out. It's raining, it's horrible. Go in. I'm just going to bed. Like, is this what life becomes? As soon as you wake up, you're like, I have nothing to do. I'm just going to go back to bed. Oh, horrible thought.
Being left behind is probably one of the biggest sort of wells that I drew from when I was writing. This was, a personal, deeply emotional game. I had to, I couldn't treat it like it was Star something, just running around in space, shooting things and mining things. This was an old lady on a farm, away from her entire family.
The kind of feelings I wanted to evoke were not all positive, right? I did want to, frustration and loneliness and, lack of agency, I think are all not nice feelings that I wanted the game to evoke. Those issues of agency came in, and that feeling of all these things are happening away from me and I can't physically do anything about them. That tension between you can do whatever you want on the farm, but this story that's panning out, you can't control at all. You can't go and stop whatever's happening. All you can do is keep going and just get on with life and control the things you can control, and accept the things you can't.
BBC News at 4 o'clock. The Court of Session in Edinburgh has ruled that failed asylum seekers can legally be evicted from government-funded accommodation. The case was brought on behalf of 2 migrants facing eviction by the private company Serco, which has a contract with the Home Office to provide accommodation for asylum seekers. The company, which illegally shared the personal information of 14 million people, has been fined £400,000.
I wanted it to feel quite cinematic. So there is a softness to it, and there is some kind of graininess going on in it, which is more accentuated at night time.
I like that I got this lamp now. That's a nice touch. It gives you incentive, because if you play a game, you want a reason to go back and play it again, don't you? Not only to enjoy the story again, but to get all the trinkets that you missed.
The shotgun's been put in,
Something's
exactly.
There's
a bench there.
The bench didn't stick around, did it?
It did, but you have to buy it. I think this was for the game Memory of God. I think I was envisaging this little village. Interesting enough, this kind of looks like how Talma's house ended up looking in the Stillness. I think the two of my favourite things to draw are little characters and little houses, I think. And this actually looks like the character from The Entertainer. So the game is running, as you can see, but it's basically stalled. So that's the UI screen. You can see the Conan vision. The game is basically stopped, but obviously the world is still the simulation is still running.
Hence all the chickens popping around.
Exactly. The monk told me the limestone is not quivering. Red cassette. I'll trade this quivering head for the red cassette. Monk wins the quivering sponge. I have no idea what that means. So all the mountains are basically cubes.
Yeah.
Just kind of placed haphazardly, really. Until they look like mountains. That's the house. Those are the. So that area is basically.
That's your playable area.
That's basically your playable area, yeah.
Can't remember what day we're on. Possibly day 10.
Oh.
I'm gonna have to water these plants, I think. And maybe milk the goats. Right, let's go make some cheese. It's cheese day. I haven't had a cheese day in a while. There we go. Mix it up. Go on. Cheese.
So this is obviously, it looks like a lot more flowery. There's flowers everywhere. There's a hoe. Oh, so that's cool. So that's like the initial kind of debug screen of the hoe. And she's holding the hoe the wrong way around. No, the windmill is in. So this is actually, I worked on a little game jam in between, and this is just sketches for that. It was never released. But it was a little iPhone game where you run through different dungeons and you collect words. So there would be treasure chests in each room, and you would collect words, and at the end of the game you would be presented with all your words, then you could make a little poem. And you had a sword and shield even though there was no combat in the game, which I thought was funny. I think the, like, in talking about agency, I think the game has to respond. You know, whether it responds the way that the player wants them to or not, is not the issue. Like, the game has to acknowledge that you've tried to do something. And it's definitely something I want to kind of develop more in future games, because I think it's definitely very interesting. And specifically the idea that the game might not respond the way that you want it to or the way that you expect it to, but it does respond. All the visual elements actually went in quite fast and came together quite fast. But then all the other stuff, the stuff that is not so immediately obvious when you look at this, that's the thing that actually took the longest time.
But by this point you were like, oh, I want a garden, you can plant stuff in.
Yeah, exactly. I knew I wanted to be able to hoe a bit of, till a bit of land, plant stuff. This is mechanics for the gardening. So I'm starting to figure out how that works now. The tiles and how they might look. I guess these are ideas for plants.
Oh no.
What's that?
I just leave it too late and then end up having to wander back in the dark. Where am I? Where am I?
And so this is actually a good example of a bug that you leave in. So initially I didn't intend it for you to be able to dance in jail, but you know, when you go to jail, it basically just changes the background and gets rid of all the people. So it was actually more work to take that out than to leave it in. This is where the character design for the entertainer starts to happen. So I think at this point I had decided that I wasn't making Memory of God, I was making the entertainer. So here you can see initial sketches. You can see how rough they are. Basically just shapes. But I already had the idea of the music box here, and the dances that he does. So the whole game is basically in that page. There's a chicken. A London chicken. So we released the game on PC, iOS, and Switch. So since we've done that, there have been a bunch of bug reports. The issues that we're working on at the moment have basically already been fixed for PC and iOS. So it's just about getting those fixes onto the Switch version. I know exactly what needs to be fixed because I've already fixed it twice. So there were a lot of bugs, yeah. And the annoying thing that not every platform is it's a lot easier to patch on Steam, for example, than Switch. So as bugs came in, they were dealt with a lot faster on PC, but on iOS and Switch they lasted a bit longer, so they affected the kind of reception of the game on those platforms.
Hello, there you are.
Get the bucket of feed. Go out to feed the goats. Milk the goats. Tin milk the cheese. Yeah, so I'm just highlighting like the gameplay loop there.
I'm gonna milk you. To the churn.
There's a few ideas, just like the struggle of life, the daily struggle of life. I think is something really interesting. That kind of creeping, looming fear of something that you can't quite put your finger on, that's like constantly growing. And also the sense of isolation, the sense of being in the middle of nowhere and vulnerable, not being wealthy, not having luxury items, just like making do with bare, simple things. And then at nightfall, everybody goes home and you're all alone. Burley Flynn goes to jail. Day 2. Yeah, there's a little spike. There's a little spike that comes out of her when she waves. See, it's those little things that take the most time to fix.
Yeah.
What's going on there? I ended up rewriting the whole animation system, in the whole model.
What's the weirdest bug you've come across?
There's I'm not sure if I should say it because it hasn't been fixed yet. But there's a bug that I still don't know how it happens or why, but sometimes when you're walking out in the desert, it seems to be reported when at night and when collecting mushrooms, for some reason seemingly at random, your character will be taken. It seemed like she's being caught in a ghostly wind, which slowly drags you across the map, and you can't do anything about it. And it drags you to the edge of the map essentially, and keeps you there, which is obviously not like ideal. Because you can't do anything, you have to quit the game. But it is kind of it's just bizarre. It's bizarre that happens, and it only happens when you're out in the desert alone, and there's almost something thematically relevant about it. If it didn't actually force the player to have to restart the game, I might be tempted to leave it in. Talma needs energy to do manual labor, like gardening. So you have to eat to keep her energy up, otherwise she can't eat. So again, it's like if you try and overwork Talma, she'll eventually stop, won't be able to do any more work, and you have to go eat. And eating takes time, and so when you're doing that, the day is going by and your chores aren't getting done, and that kind of the feeling of like the day slipping away from you. But at the end of the day, you're eating. You have to eat to stay alive, so you shouldn't. It's a good thing. Eating is good. To see eating as like just getting in the way of your your cheese making business or whatever. It's just an interesting kind of dynamic there.
Most of the characters are quite self-absorbed. So it makes sense that they would, the world is ending, but...
I think we all see a little bit of ourselves in that. I mean, I think, on a high level, I think it might suggest a tendency to have our priorities in the wrong places most of the time, and most of us. Yeah, at least for me. So I think when you see it in the game, you kind of feel more empathy because they feel more real.
Oh my word. I think I might walk away. There's not really much else I can do. Oh, Jesus!
I suppose all of the characters were flawed, wouldn't you say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
But some of their flaws...
Do you think Talma is flawed? She doesn't have any dialogue, but do you think indirectly there's enough of her character to be... I mean, one thing I did want consciously was for her character not to be inferred that strongly, because I wanted her to be essentially a vessel for the player to fill with their own. And the more you define a character, the more you're likely to alienate the player from that character. Some UI notes. Here's the speech bubble design. I think I was trying to work out some icons. That's one of the most useful things, I think, is watching someone play and just writing down everything that you notice. Not stopping them, not even talking to them, just observing them. One thing I do like about this is that everything is on one screen. Right? Everything you need is there, which I think is quite nice. And again, it was because of the constraints, right? I didn't want to have to do a camera system, so it's just so much easier just plonk the camera and not have to worry about it again. I made Where the Goats Are, which took 3 months, 3-4 months. And then I made Stillness, which took over a year. I have a feeling that this is the end of Where the Goats Are. And that's the first sketch of what might happen after. So I think this is the initial ideas of Stillness. I can't drop low. It's stuck on. Initially, I was really worried about that decision of being able to leave the farm, because Where the Goats Are, you can't. But I think this is when I started thinking about like, it's just such a nice thing to be able to walk into the desert.
Yeah.
And you've just got this little character. It's just this feeling of just walking into nothingness. It's big.
Look at that hay bale. Oh, it's a bench.
It's a bench. What is this doing here? I wonder if it does anything.
Can she sit on it?
Oh,
Oh.
there you go. A lot of the games that you see don't really. They do everything they can not to be mundane. You know, mundanity is almost like a cardinal sin in most video games. Also, like my tastes in general, like in terms of films, especially, I love that mundanity when it's like framed correctly. It can be incredibly interesting. Oh, that's actually what happens when you sit in the bench in the final game. You sit down, except it's in front of the house. You sit down and you get this view. But again, just looking at like having a different camera point of view. So that's how I composed the scene from that view, just making sure that, because that view had to work.
Oh. Thunderstorm. It's grey. Something to harvest. It's all a bit. It's like impending doom is upon me.
Like, sure, the world is ending, but is that more or less sad that the fact that she's there alone, you know?
Yeah, and I suppose the game kind of answers that question by the fact that it's chosen to focus on Talma,
Yeah,
as opposed to
definitely.
whatever's going on. They're definitely like those less comfortable emotions. Were definitely one of the main goals of the project. You know, again, it just lines up with my sensibilities and the things that I like. You know, my favorite films are the most bleak films. You know, my favorite books are the most bleak books. Initially, it was going to take place on this little island, and there was going to be a little building, and you'd go around and you do various things. But you can see already that there's a goat here. There's, you know, a little round character that looks like Talma. A note about a weird machine. A weird machine that you have to keep feeding. Because it was a quick development cycle, and I hadn't planned it all out. So I was just kind of going along with it. So, you know, I would make decisions, and then later on I would do something in contradiction of that. But I wouldn't go back and make everything consistent. So there are things that, design decisions that kind of were made when the project was in a prior version, and didn't catch up in the end. When I started Stillness, I literally took the code for this and started building on top of it. But I did have a design document because I needed funding, and I did consider self-publishing, just again because you have that control. But then marketing is something that I don't feel comfortable with at all. So signing up with a publisher, I don't think changed the game, except for maybe it gave me a bit more breathing room to actually do what I wanted with the game.
What is that? There's something on the wall. Can you see it? And clearly, the more you invest in the pattern of the game, the better you are at the pattern of the game, the more you receive as well. So there's been some things that I've missed, and not only in the decor, but there was a book that I missed as well, wasn't there? Which means obviously I won't have that now. Oh no, I've made a mistake. Well, I'm looking for water, but it's not going to do me much good if I haven't got a bucket. But I've already come too far.
And this is another game that I had an idea for, set in space. but the atmosphere was going to be such that it feels like you're underwater, so you're floating around. Okay, so we actually have a... This is very similar to the last one. I'll tell you what we do have though is the actual interior. So that looks all thereabouts, actual final assets. You can't interact with anything. So again, like it looks very similar to the final product, but actually getting the behavior, you know, getting the letters, and that needs to be fixed. Making it look like what it looks like is a fraction of the work. Actually making it possible to go to bed, making it possible to sit on the chair, making it possible to cook food from the stove, you know. That kind of stuff is the stuff that takes a long time.
Yeah.
This is the one that I wish that I had time to put in. The cat. I was going to have a cat in the house, which would sit on your lap when you sat on the chair. That would have been really nice. It's weird. It's funny because you mentioned the survival mechanics, and there aren't really any survival mechanics.
Yeah.
You can't die.
Yeah.
So it can't be a survival game.
Yeah.
But it almost has the pretense of that, and I think I like the idea of the player not being sure.
Yeah.
And not wanting to test it.
That's how I felt.
You know, I remember I was play testing, and because I knew you weren't supposed to dance in jail, I never danced in jail. But then, as soon as I just thought, oh, what happens if I press space? And I pressed space, he started dancing. I was like, oh, that's a bug. Then I was like, oh, actually...
Came about money anyway.
Really?
I think I got 4 coins.
I've completely forgot. How much is bread?
5, it's sold.
I've completely forgot.
You know, the generic disaster movie, it's always, like, the scientists are always 100% about the disaster.
Yeah.
And, like, it's why it's so easy not to care about them.
Even if you're a scientist, you're a human scientist, right?
If as far as, like, how people actually work, it's not realistic. But sort of in the ideal sense, that is what you would want from your scientists.
So this is the actual texture that I use to texture all of the models in the game. So every color that you see in the game has been sampled from one of these blocks. Mostly I'm just sampling colors. But the actual pattern, I'm not sure. Oh, well, it's on the wall there. You can see it. So basically what this is I've just told this model these vertices are just using the green, and then these are using the red. It's not actually using a pattern.
It feels like it's strange, isn't it? Because like it's sort of desolate anyway, but it feels more desolate. And there wasn't a lot there to begin with. But it's funny how you can sort of feel everything gone.
So the goats are quite interesting. So their colors are basically randomized. And the way I do this is I randomly assign the texture to the goats. So you can actually see elements of the pattern in that texture appearing. But you can see that presentation-wise, it's getting a lot closer to
this looks
final.
Yeah, this looks really similar.
Yeah, and it looks like all of the farm has reached its final rumination on the stillness of the wind. That was what it was going to be called, but then we figured it's a bit of a mouthful. I think as time goes on, the sketchbook gets more practical. Oh, this is quite nice. This is interactions. So these are like the icons for the interactions. I wouldn't feel comfortable, having someone come in and do the art, or the design or something like that. Someone offering to do the marketing is a lot more appealing, just because it fills a void, which a void in my skill set, and just lighten the load a little bit, so I can focus more on making the game as good as I can. Kind of, yeah. It kind of makes me wish I did more involved, like animal maintenance mechanics. Stillness is a full stop.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, this is a story, full stop, right?
Sure.
Move on. I wanted it to be a little bit more, just, inescapable in a way. And you can't just imagine that everybody lives happily ever after.
The Throne of Kings. I don't want to sell all my chickens, actually. Grief! How much is that Throne of Kings? I really want it though. Whoa! It's wiping me out. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to get that. Jealousy. Already, look how much I can keep if I don't get that throne. That's insane. That guy drives a hard bargain.
A lot of the post-processing was just to make it feel like glowy and bright, because she's supposed to be in the middle of a desert. I think just like blowing out the lights and making it feel like really warm and welcoming, and just having this golden glow across the whole thing. And that was important just because the idea was to contrast, right? To have the images to look like really appealing and happy and warm, but then the narrative kind of moves from that into a kind of darker place. So that contrast between like what you initially think and how you initially feel in the world, compared to how things end up in the narrative, I think was quite important. So here we go. Let's see if I fixed the hoe. So I still have the placeholder. There's no animations or anything, but you can actually. It works. That's kind of funny. Can I drop it? I can drop it. Progress has been made. That's cool. So this is like the placeholder UI.
Oh yeah.
So you can actually plant little seeds.
I'm a little bit worried. Oh, of course. It was there all along. I was just about to say, I'm a little bit worried about my seeds. So they haven't got any water, and then just as I was about to say it, I noticed the well.
Well, it's hopefully an experience that you won't get from another video game.
The fact that because you have to figure it all out on your own, you sort of go around and you're like, okay, it's here, it's here, it's here. It sort of gives the impression that this old woman is a bit senile, because you walk all the way around, you go, oh yeah, the well was here. And I've lived here for 75 years and I forgot that the well was right next to the house.
So we can actually move on to maybe fixing some real bugs.
So what are you looking at fixing? Is this your list? This is a list of bugs you've got?
This is my list, yeah. It's got about 50.
Yeah.
50 different things. Some of them might take 2 seconds. Some of them might take longer. To be honest, like I just like the fact that it's a game about an old lady in the middle of nowhere. Everything else is just kind of, it is what it is. But I think that premise is the reason why it was as successful as it was.
How much of the process of making the game is, do you riff off bugs? Do you riff off errors? Do you build it as you go, or is it is a lot more of it pre-planned and you just put it together?
Yeah, it's like that's definitely part of it. so when I started, I didn't know exactly how it was going to be in the end. There had definitely been instances where I would playtest the game, something doesn't happen as I intended it to, but it was actually kind of cool. And either I put that in as a feature, or it gives me an idea for another feature or something like that. I think the repetition kind of lulls you into a state of rhythm, right? It's like the days going by, the repetitive tasks. It all kind of lulls you into that pace, that slow pace of the day. Oh, we got a text. That's a new system that wasn't in. Obviously, a white box and a placeholder. So I suppose this is the point where I was talking to the UI guy, and I was like, okay, we've got all the UI basically in and functioning. Let's start putting it in. I think the simplicity, even though it came out of constraints initially, I think is actually one of the strongest aspects of the game, because it doesn't try to do too much. It is a sandbox, but at the same time, you can't do everything. A lot of people have described their experience. Oh, you can do anything, but you can't. You're right. It's actually very, very limited. Well, I guess if Tom is an actor, which the player is controlling, that actor has to act within the confines of the narrative. Like, so even though she doesn't have lines, she still exists within the narrative.
Yeah.
So complete freedom would be the wrong way to go.
Actually, you've still got some of the old images.
Yeah, that's the old UI. I don't know what's going on here. I think maybe
She milking a chicken?
No, she's milking it. So something is happening, but I think it's bugged, and the cursor is like freaking out. She's the locations, the landmarks. The narrative is tied into everything. So I think that was me saying, okay, you have to engage with the narrative in some capacity, right?
Yeah. And it doesn't really force any of it on you. In fact, at all, right? It's all.
No, I mean
there.
it does in the sense that, like, if you don't engage with it, you're probably going to be pretty bored. Right. So in avoiding boredom, you're gonna interact with it. But it definitely doesn't. It doesn't force it on you.
It doesn't throw a brick at you, but it does keep building walls.
Yeah.
And eventually you're going to bump into something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of the player feeling like they're in control, and anything that happens just happened naturally. I think that's the key.
Yeah.
I definitely think that that's a very nice way of designing and marrying the mechanics with the story.
I just bit of late night cheese making. The whole thing's soothing. I feel lethargic. On cheese. Maybe she should go to bed. You've had a hard night. Look at that. It's quite mystical. I'd like to know who she is.
Like, I wanted the player to feel familiar with the place that they're in, so they feel at home, just like Talma would feel at home on the homestead. So that when essentially everything is taken away from you, you would feel it as she's feeling it, right? Because you feel like you know that place because you've spent however many days there, and you've essentially put in your hard labor into that place. You've tried to make it into a home. You've tried to maintain it, and ultimately, you will have failed. I think it had to be that way.
Yeah.
Well, in order for the player to feel like they know these family members are their family members, right? So when the end comes, you actually feel like you're losing this connection, which you feel that you have, and it's only by like those details, those little details, that you might forget if you're writing a grand opera, you know, space drama, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, for this kind of thing, absolutely crucial in order for the game to have any effect on the player, right? Everyone thought this was a post box, but it's actually a shrine where you pray. But I kind of, because a post box is quite a good idea, in Stillness I actually used the same model and put it in front of your gate and acted as a post box, even though it's the exact same model. No one's really questioned why the post box looks like that, because it doesn't look like a post box. Initially I was not going to have one, because I thought, well, if you're not there to get a letter or to trade, then you miss it, you know, and I wanted that to be kind of valuable in a way, and I wanted people to really try and be there and you know, care if they actually missed it. But then number one, it was kind of unfair, I suppose, because it discouraged people from actually wandering about, which I want them to do. And also it's just not realistic, right? Because if post comes and you're not in the post box,
there will be players who don't read the letters, right?
it's possible.
Certainly missing them is believable.
Yeah.
She has so many things to do on the farm. But even if she doesn't read them, like, you can make sense of that in your head.
As a counterpoint to mainstream games, like the agency is kind of one of the main things that they try to do, right? But in that case, it's like they want to give the player as much agency as possible. I just wanted to do something different, you know. So instead of giving the player maximum agency, I stripped it away. And there he is. Again, that's looking at the music box and how that might work. You can see the town square clock here. These ideas for the bread seller, what he would look like, how it would go. There's even a little storyboard to how the game would happen. So you have the title screen, first screen, day one screen. One thing I remember when I released the game is that everyone was like, "Oh my god, it's so hard," and I was like, "What are you talking about? It's so easy," you know, because I was playing it so much that I was breezing through it, suggesting or letting players assume that they had more agency than they actually did have, until it became obvious that they never had it in the first place, you know. That for me was kind of interesting and also kind of worrying, right? Because you don't know how people are going to respond to that. It's obviously not a nice feeling, but I didn't want to explore nice feelings, you know. I wanted to explore the other side of things.
Coyan contacted me summer of last year, I think it was.
It was fairly late in the project.
Yeah, it was. There was already a lot of text in the game. There were some edits that needed to be made. I think that the rest of the game was shifting, and the text needed to shift with it. I mean, the writing in the game even before I got there was really great. There was a lot to work with. There's a lot of the ideas just I fell in love with. And you know, having played Where the Goats Are, I kind of knew sort of the aesthetic sensibilities that you were going for.
I've walked over there to find nothing, and the day's over then.
When you get a reward, it should feel, I think there's an expectation on the player for it to feel like you have been rewarded within the construct of the game itself.
Yeah.
And I think that's why in Stillness, like you said, the game doesn't assign any value to the letters. It's not even aware if you read them or not. It's not going to punish you for not reading them. It's not going to force you to read them if you miss them.
Right. Oh, I've got a letter. Everything sounds so yummy in this world, doesn't it? Pickled chewing leather. Am I maybe the only person that thinks that sounds tasty?
No, that sounds great.
Pickled chewing leather.
You know these people are very far from. The relationships are varying degrees of strained. I think most people can relate to getting a text message that they don't want to read right away.
Yeah.
More so that they don't want to respond to right away.
Yeah.
I'm just not ready for this right now, or maybe ever, right? And it's funny that Thelma acts that out, but without a cell phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of the widest birth of the decision space is for Thelma to choose whether to read a letter or not.
When you're making a game like this, it's quite easy to feel the pressure of other games that do so much and have hundreds of hours of gameplay and have all the latest technology and physics and all these things. I think the fact that the game is not filled with stuff is essential for the actual kind of story that it's trying to tell. And I think if I caved to that pressure, I would have put more in. I would have filled it with stuff, filled it with side quests and just anything I could think of. Oh wait, look. I think I've messed up some values, and it's just so much milk required to fill up the bar.
Oh, is that the bar?
So there's just so many little things that just aren't working properly, and that's the majority of the work, is just making those little things all work together. So if we press a U on the keyboard, you can see this screen comes up. So this has a bunch of stuff like options to hide UI, hide cursor, hide dialogue. I can change the speed of the day directly from this slider. Here's some designs more flamboyant than they turned out. What was important was like the patterning between the main character and the goats was similar. In terms of books, the main one was 100 Years of Solitude, which was like the themes of family, the themes of time. So again, that progression of things basically just going downhill and not coming back up, they just go straight downhill. I can give Thelma super speed, which, because she's an old lady, she walks quite slowly. So if you need to get Frog to another location pretty fast, I have this option where I can just make it so she can run super fast. So you can imagine if I'm fixing a bug with one of the locations outside of the farm here, having to walk to this location every time, especially if you don't fix it first time, it just takes a long time. So super speed really helps here. I needed to have at least some kind of a plan, right, as to what it was going to be.
Yeah.
Because when I was talking to publishers, there was a lot of confusion as to what I was even doing. Right? Is it going to be a new game? Is it a sequel? Is it like an expansion? Like what is it? So initially it was going to be just this, but like bigger, more mechanics. Some more narrative, whatever. Oh no! Wait, yeah. Oh, so it's not a click thing, it's a click and hold. So you click and hold, and you were supposed to move the mouse like that. That's why. I remember. But like I just did, trying to click it and it's just freaking out. Obviously, it's not the best system. It's funny actually because she's so driven by the player.
Yeah.
She could be industrious or lazy depending on who's playing.
Tama's character, it would never be right for her to leave the farm for whatever reason. It just would never be right. But what can she do? She can collect goats. She can draw in the sand. And to me, all of those still fit her character. These are all things that I could see her doing. Because none of them are so vastly different from each other.
Yeah.
They're all reflections of an emotional state.
Her. I love all this though. A little bit of digging, planting seeds, raising your goats.
And this is way more brutal than anything else I've done. But I remember I wanted it to be. I was like, yeah, you know what? The story is a busker who's trying to busk for a living, for change. But it is hard, right? He's having a hard time. I mean, it's funny when he dances, but he's working for a living. I wasn't thinking about any games in particular, except maybe Kentucky Route Zero. That for me, in terms of mood, I think was, and the fact that not a lot happens. It's very slow. It's very slow paced, very rhythmical. And it has that same kind of slow rhythm that kind of lulls you into this almost dreamlike state. I think I really enjoyed that about it. So this is pretty much how it ended up, even though and the bird is in front of you.
I know, it's that.
Stuff.
God, that's long.
Yeah. So this is the same, except you don't have to. Right now, you have to click on the thing in order to do it.
Yeah.
Check that chicken. It's massive. I love their feet though, and the feathers on the feet. The traction that my tweets were getting on Twitter just indicated to me that there was something about the game that it was going to be successful, even though it was just a free game. So I never imagined any money coming from it. Just as a starting point for a career, I thought it could do well. These are sketches of what I thought was going to be Where the Goats Are 2. So the idea was that you play the same character, but you go to the city. You actually see the city. And you can see here that you actually have a little child that you can interact with. So this is Tolma on a train. She goes to the city. She's looking at the city with her goats in the distance. So 0.3. So this is the end of pre-alpha stage. So everything is in place.
Yeah, front gate ended up bigger, didn't it?
Yeah.
And the box isn't there yet. Post box.
I'm more scared to play this with this idea of a child. That you would have to take care of a child. And I have some notes here. It says Tikva, elderly, house in the country, dream sequences. So dream sequences was was one of the first things I knew that I wanted to put in. The day. without spoiling anything, there are ways to meet the end without it being so explicit. Right? It always ends the same way, but what happens to Talma, what her fate is, can be more ambiguous, or it can be more explicit. I think a lot of the initial ideas for the project were purely just counterpoints to what I saw as ongoing stereotypes being developed in more mainstream video games. So I used that as a kind of design tool to help me make decisions. So if I came up into a design problem, I could say, well, what do mainstream video games do? And I would do the exact opposite of that. So I'm really struggling with even making it past day 2. And I made the game. There's a lot of like feedback that you don't get. It wasn't obvious that I even bought anything from that guy. You don't see these things when you're developing. You know, you're playing it. You're like, oh yeah, this works really well, and you know, it's all good. But I mean, it's really interesting because now I haven't played it since I finished it.
It's nice once you start to get more comfortable with the way the space works, the way that you or the character interacts with the space. You become more comfortable doing her chores. You have like pride in all these little tasks and chores that you're doing.
Oh man, these bugs plagued me like throughout the whole development. I only actually got rid of them completely right at the end, like the last minute. There's 2 kinds of bugs. There's bugs which people have reported, and there's bugs, there's bugs which people haven't reported, but I've noticed myself, right? And I've said, oh, I want to change that. And most of them are quite small. For example, one is rug tassels were glowing in the dark. Right, I mean, and that's the rug is actually not. It's an optional item that you can get. So the majority of players actually experiencing that would be quite small, and even then, it doesn't break the game. Things were a lot simpler when I was working on those smaller free games. I think when money's not involved, everything's just a lot simpler. When I moved on to Stillness. It was going to be a commercial product because I needed to actually make money from it now. It kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger until we decided actually everything is going to be just new. So we set Stillness kind of 100 or so years after this takes place. All the chickens are stuck. So you play as Talma, an old elderly goat herder farmer, who lives on his isolated homestead in the middle of a desert. And you have 2 goats and a pocket full of seeds. And that's it.
You must be Talma. Pick up the bucket. Make the wave.
Yeah, I think if it was like a young person moving around the world quite slowly, people might get frustrated. But I think to design Talma, she's not aerodynamic, so you kind of don't expect that to be moving around as fast. So I think it just makes more sense with the pace of the game. And there's no landmarks. You can walk in the desert, but there's nothing in the desert. And I can't remember if there was a point where that was going to be it.
Yeah.
There was actually going to be nothing in the desert.
There's loads of space left just like in a good film, you know, there's
Yeah,
loads
yeah,
of
yeah.
space left for the imagination
Yeah.
to fill in the blanks.
I think that's why the kind of design of the game works because of exactly that. Like it's designed around not explaining everything. It just gives you a little bit, and it lets you and gives you the space to just imagine everything else.
Yeah.
But I just really enjoyed like this visual
Yeah.
of just a tiny little person in the middle of nothingness. And I think the idea was to put landmarks in the desert so that you would actually go outside. Because I imagine people playing goats, at least, you know, if there's no incentive to go out, you probably wouldn't realize you can.
What's the one thing we know about Tom? She doesn't want to leave the farm. We didn't give a reason really as to why she has to stay. There's an offhand mention.
Yeah, right. There's no reason why she would have to stay.
Yep. So she willingly watched her family go and decided not to follow them.
Maybe she pushed him away.
Why are they still riding then?
Good question. So I had no idea what I was going to do for the interface, and I went with these speech bubbles. It doesn't quite work for me. There's just something about the style, like the rigid geometry of the models.
Yeah.
Kind of clashes a little bit with the. Oh. This UI is really confusing. Like, what? This is notes for the day-night cycle. How that's working. Oh, this is post-processing notes and settings. I got a note: merchant coming today, better make cheese. So that's obviously what I imagine a player, or what I would want the player to feel. In most games, obviously, you can do whatever you want. You can get everything you want. You can collect. You can, you know, you're the star of the show, and you know, the game kind of bends over backwards to appeal to you. So when they experience something that's kind of, you know, borderline hostile towards the player, people see it as a flaw because they're expecting certain things from a game. The time thing is interesting because like that's definitely the feeling that I wanted to convey, that you don't have enough time in the day, right? I didn't want the game to stop and wait for you to take action, right? I wanted the world to go with or without you. This is working out the logic for the cheese making. This is how the icon changes between if you don't have a bucket and you do have a bucket. That's chicken animation. So I was working out when the keyframes would have to be. That's it. And this is the farm.
So you can go in here. That it's not like a separate space that you move to when you go
exactly.
into.
It probably should be to make things easier. The way that I did it is actually one coherent space. Tom is having a sleep. Chickens are still going. We fixed one error, so we got a bit further, but we hit another error, so we still can't play, and my mouse has stopped working, which obviously makes it quite hard to work. So I think I just need to just plug it in. Oh, but I can't because this is really awkward. So none of those USB ports work. I think if I just plug this in. USB. Yeah. I have to be really careful with, because this monitor, that book is like propping up the power cord, and if it's jiggled just a little bit, it'll completely turn off, and I'm worried it won't turn on again. So actually there. I think it ran out of battery. I had a rabbit. It lived for like 11 years. Whenever you try to pick it up, it would just scratch the hell out of you. But then we just like, we don't care, we're just gonna hug it, no matter how much blood is drawn. And it eventually just gave up, and it was just like, it just turned into the nicest, most placid little sociable rabbit. You know, when you're a solo developer, you're doing everything, and you're juggling a lot of plates, both inside the game and outside the game.
Why did you put the cooking in?
I think just because it's just a nice little mundane task, you know, and it's so essential, right? I think if a game like this, which is about like looking into someone's life, I think if you ignored that, especially like the idea of subsistence and kind of living off the land.
The moment that you can farm something, that you can perform an act just really repetitively in order to get the reward from it, whether it's currency or whatever, it becomes a Skinner box, basically. Can you really farm goat's milk?
Yeah.
But like not...
You're literally on a farm.
Yeah. Well, what I mean is you can't min-max it. It's...
You can try. And that is one thing I was conscious of, for players to try to min-max. Kind of allow them to do that, but then by the end of the game, the fact that they've min-maxed doesn't put them on any kind of advantage than someone who has just wandered around for 3 hours, you know.
I don't hear any chirpy kid noises. And I got nothing. Well, thankfully there's a big fat mushroom at the back there that's going to be that. I can't believe it, I worked so hard for all of that. Hello.
If someone says, oh, it's really hard, and I say, well, yeah, it's supposed to be hard. But playing it now, it's like, yeah, it's too hard, right? And it's not, the game doesn't do enough to like communicate with you and help you and put you on a fair playing field. Oh no.
Yeah. I think what's nuts about playing it is you do a few days and you're not even sure if you're supposed to get anywhere. You know?
Yeah.
So it's like...
You start to doubt if there is actually an ending. The game was basically finished months before it came out, but it was with the porting house getting it ready for the other platforms. So I didn't really have anything to do leading up to the release date, but knowing that it's coming up, and you know, in a matter of weeks, that thing that you've been working on for the past year is going to be coming out, and people are going to be playing it and talking about it. It just, as soon as that dawned on me, it just freaked me out.
What's this? Little object.
There's ideas of a younger, middle-aged lodger living with you. Something about Princess Mononoke. And discovering more about Tikva. The city. Death of a child. if I make a few more here, you can see that some of them are more monochrome, some of them are more blocky. And the cool thing about the goats is that this specific color scheme is saved. So when the goats have a baby, it'll inherit the same color scheme, but it'll be slightly different, so slightly offset. So they'll have the same basic colors, but the patterns, which are taken from the texture, they'll be slightly different.
Oh look, yes.
We actually got into the game. So this is basically the Switch version, but we're running on the PC. So now when we investigate these general bugs that we have, we can actually fix it or attempt to fix it here, and then we can go straight into we can just play the game straight away and see if we've actually fixed it, or more importantly, we can see if we've broken something that we didn't realize we'd broken. And bugs like these are just kind of funny, I don't think people mind that much. But obviously, we were just talking about the deeper concepts and principles and themes of the game. When a bug like this happens, it completely snaps you out of it. Yeah. So that for me was kind of very real, in that the game is designed in such a way that if a bug like this happens, the experience kind of is ruined, because you're taken out of it completely. It just completely undermines any kind of, These look like just designs for Talma. You can see here that she's quite long and triangular, like Tikva is from where the goats are. But then down here she starts to get a little bit squatter. And here you can see the kind of patchwork design, which I went for in the end. Even though, for months I'd been like, oh God, I wish the game was done, I wish it was out. When that time was coming up, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to release it. I want to just delete it and just pretend it never happened, and just everyone's going to forget about it. I was just convinced that everyone's going to hate it, and no one was going to, people were going to play it and they were going to say, what the hell is this? And I literally thought I was going to get hate mail. I was preparing myself for hate mail from people who were just like, this is so bad. This game is just the worst game that's ever come out. The changes between each build gets progressively smaller and smaller, right?
So by the end, you're just bug fixing, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
When we get to Pre-Gold Master, we probably wouldn't be able to find the difference between that and that.
I get the sense that with all these world-ending narratives out there in TV, movies, what have you, what do people... The stories that we hear from players, what do we hear? We hear, oh, I found this small character with this one tiny detail, and their whole life just springs to mind, and that's what I remember. Not, blowing up a zeppelin over a fallen monument of some country. It's small moments, right? And I think the saddest thing about the world ending isn't that the world is ending; it's that the people in it, we won't get to see them anymore.
Yeah, I think in Where the Goats Are, she looked very clean. I think I wanted to kind of muddy up the Stillness a little bit and make it a little less pristine. But I really like the lamp.
I got the lamp.
But it doesn't feel like in lots of games, you can get lamps. But I think because this doesn't serve a function, it makes it a little bit more special. And the bench as well, when you sit down on it, you just get a different point of view.
Yeah.
which I think is nice. It's not essential by any means, but yeah, it's nice.
Oh my goodness.
The stick is similar in that I just wanted something that you can interact with that doesn't have, that is not for like a purpose. It's not, you don't use it so you can get some reward or, you know, whatever. You just use it for the sake of using it. They're glowing in the dark.
Well, you have your blockbuster Hollywood films, right? Which are, you know, draw parallels to the blockbuster AAA games.
Yeah.
But you also have the indie and the art house films that almost exclusively focus on the more personal, intimate stories, right? It seems like they're serving both. But with video games, it seems to be slightly different. That you have your blockbuster AAA action explosions shooting, but your indie games almost try and occupy the same space. They're telling the same stories.
Quite horrific, wasn't it?
The Turin Horse by Bellatar was probably the most important influence. So that structure of things start out where they start out, and they progressively get worse and worse and worse and worse, and it doesn't recover. Oh, I got to the end. Many years later. I'm an old man in jail, but I still have my... They couldn't take that away from me.
So like an indie game, an indie platformer will still be about the world ending, you have to save it. The same story as the AAA blockbuster. And it seems like they exist, but there's not many of them that try and refocus the lens on the smaller details and the personal stories and the more mundane elements of life. The spaces between, as opposed to the objects themselves. And I think I guess that's something that I was trying to address with Stillness, in that, okay, no matter how much I was drawn to the bigger narrative, I had to keep reminding myself that this is Talma's story.
There is something kind of appealing to living like that. Because I reckon Talma's probably the most peaceful person on the planet, isn't she? She has no worries. All her family love her and make sure they write to her. Hey! Hey! My old friend.
You can see, like, again, because you only ever see a kind of sliver of this wall.
Yeah.
You never see this because you're always looking through it. You know, there's nothing modelled there. I don't know why this has another bit coming out here. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cozy. I keep seeing these weird, strange machines. They keep cropping up, and here, like, Tiva is like interacting with it. I don't know where they come from. They've not like appeared in any game. There's another one. I think that if I don't have anything to draw, I'll just naturally draw those kinds of things, and then I've though I'm not doing that. But it's very interesting that they keep popping up.
To me, in another way, the narrative wasn't what was happening in the city. I kind of thought of that as a B plot. Because there have been...
Oh, interesting. Because I thought of the opposite. I thought the city is the A plot, or like the mega narrative, and then on the farm, the player enacts the micro narrative. That's kind of how I imagined it.
Just like playing through these builds just reminds me of how many things went wrong. Oh look, now we've got the separate spaces that's been put in, and you can go to bed. Yeah, so it's getting there. All the animations are getting there.
I've clearly just gone too far around, I think. But I couldn't have. I didn't like walk that. Doesn't make any sense. It must be. Good grief, what? I don't know. What is this? I don't think I know what this is.
We saw the jumps from build to build were quite significant, and when you're working on it, that's really nice because every day you stop working and the build is significantly different to what you started with in the morning. So it feels like you're making a lot of progress. Towards the end, like it's a lot slower, and you can spend days or even weeks on one thing. And if it's something that's not that obvious, it can be really disheartening because you spend like a couple of days on fixing something, and then for all intents and purposes the build looks exactly the same.
That's rain.
So I knew it wasn't going to have a happy ending. I think it is also why I counterpointed it with the beginning of the game and the kind of the screenshots that you see in the location. Kind of, it doesn't suggest that at all, it looks like it's going to be a much happier game than it is. So the player going through that emotional spectrum while they were playing through the game was kind of the goal.
I bought 2 chickens and they just disappeared. Everything's going.
So maybe another part of it was just thinking about how the rest of the game was not so happy.
It is a sad game, but at the same time, the sadness comes from nostalgia, right? Memories, and so there has to be this happy memory that you put in place in order for you to feel sad when that's taken away.
There's a train. This is a train track. And I think this is Thelma in her garden doing gardening. So out of all these sketches, in the end, the only thing that actually made it was this image, which is basically that image sums up the stillness. Oh, and obviously, how do I drop things? The structure of a day goes by. This guy comes by.
So a lot of it survived into the stillness. It just kind of got expanded and developed. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Who's this?
Oh, here's the merchant. So he looks very much like the entertainer. Actually, in Where the Goats Are, I think he literally is the entertainer. And I only changed the model in Stillness. My main issue with the character from Where the Goats Are was that she didn't really look old. She didn't look old enough. Even though she was supposed to be an old woman. So one of the things I want to do with Thelma is make sure that players understand that she's an old woman, and also not athletic. I think all of the interactions on the farm and the speed at which they happen is all influenced by that. And I think that kind of sets the tone for the whole game in a way, especially the fact that so much of it is about nostalgia and memory. You know, she's constantly reminded of back in the day when she was younger. We'll jump to pre-Gold Master here. So this is getting pretty close to the end. So I think this is when we're very much in that state of like, it's almost there. There's just a lot of tiny little tweaks and bug fixes. So this is where like all the builds start merging into one, and the changes are not that. Oh, that's cool. It's like an earlier version of the intro text.
Mate, I should have had meerkats in the desert. Damn it. I don't think I've ever seen a meerkat in person. They're quite cool. I imagine they're highly stressed. I think you might have been able to hunt them, but not have it as a thing you had to do. Right? So if you didn't want to do it, you didn't have to. And then, even then, if you did hunt them, you can either eat them, or you could try and sell the fur or something. So that could have been quite interesting, because like the game isn't trying to push any kind of morality. It's up to the player to decide.
A decision has more weight if there's no in-game consequence.
Yeah.
Because, and I think that's quite profound, and I think it explains Stillness quite a lot. It explains why it works. Because if a game rewards you or punishes you for doing something, then you do it, right? But you're doing it even if you're not doing it for the reward. That's a part of it. Yeah. So this has final music. And it has intro text as well. So I think at this point, like, the game is pretty much there in its structure. From this point, it's just polishing.
What happens most is a player does something and then they get rewarded, or they don't.
Yeah, that's like the game design model.
And we see that as the player learns to perform that trick in a more complex way, the rewards get bigger and bigger and bigger.
So this is another game that I was going to do. I guess you were going to be this little creature in the forest, and then I decided to make it so you're a little girl wandering around the plants, touching the plants, touching the trees, and you would meet this big guy. I think exploring gameplay designs and mechanics that don't involve that Skinner box method, and I think it's quite difficult.
Yeah.
And a lot of people reduce game design to that Skinner box psychological test, but I think it would be very good for the industry to kind of think about other options. So this is a good example of scaling back. So initially it was going to be this guy who is your friend, and he's this giant and he walks around with you. But then scoping it back, actually he's just this static statue. I think there's a few ways of giving value to rewards. Either visuals, things that look better than previous things, or gameplay, they're more powerful than the previous things. And there was they showed the Anthem designs, like a low level weapon and a high level weapon, and it was very hard to tell the difference. I think the point is that
the value that the game puts on the rewards, and the rewards have to make sense within within the hierarchy of the game, and there has to be a sense of progression.
Yeah.
But Stillness doesn't really have that. It's kind of horizontal in the fact that you can't advance. There's no way to advance further than someone else, you know.
Because I remember all the criticisms of the game, like, oh, it's so annoying when you literally can't, you know, he's right there, and I'm just so slow. And I was like, yeah, that's life, you know. But yeah, playing it now, it is an issue. So, you know, we've made some progress, so now we can actually see the game. Hopefully we should get a bit further. I mean, but this is what it is. It's just like little steps, playing until you hit a wall, and then when you hit that wall, you deal with it, and then you're going to hit another wall, and then you deal with it, and then you hit another one. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to get that other ending. Day 3, I'm dead already.
I'm using the guy right there.
This is bizarre. This is Talma floating with a goat and the merchant just watching her. I think that was an idea for a dream.
Just gonna get a few shrooms. I'm just worried about her. Talma, that is.
What do you mean?
I don't know what's gonna happen to her.
This was the idea is a dream sequence, and there's this goat in the middle of the field, and when you approach it, you start milking it, and the more you milk it, the bigger it gets, until it's a giant goat. And this is the cheese pot, and you go up to it and you start stirring the cheese, and then the room you're in starts flooding until Tom is covered in water.
Okay, something's gonna happen. I'm a bit worried. I'm gonna go get my shotgun. Take it into the house. Oh.
There's a dream sequence that, again, it's floating Talma. I don't know what it is about that image. That's quite good. So I think the idea was to use mechanics that were in the game and present them as normal things, but then when you interact with them, they did something weird. And then it came out, and I hit the release button, and nothing happened. And it was quite anticlimactic. And once I was sure that it was released everywhere and everything went okay, I didn't know what to do with myself. I was like, that's it, it's done. I'm not working on the game anymore, it's finished. What do I do now? She has footsteps now, which I think is I remember when I put them in, it just made such a big difference. You know, she felt like she was actually in the world. And mushrooms. And in terms of player response, it's actually been, really nice. Like I think my biggest fear was releasing it and then nobody really caring. But very soon after I released the game, I started getting messages from people saying that it really affected them, and I had a few people recounting memories that they have of relatives or whatever. So kind of the game had evoked memories that they have in their own life. So that was really nice to hear.
a bit intense.
And on Goats, actually, I left the ending ambiguous. You know, it just cut out. And I think a part of me thought that was a bit of a cop-out. You know, even though I think it worked, for me, I think I wanted to be a bit more authoritative with what I wanted the ending to be, rather than, screen went black, so imagine, you know, just use your imagination, you know. It's got some camera controls, so I can manually control what shot I want to use, straight from here, just to test different shots. And it also has cheat codes. I can pause time, and then cheat codes, for example, spawning goats. I can spam this and get as many goats as I want, and I can get chickens as well. The time is not constant. It stretches and contracts depending on what you're doing. So actually, when you're more active, so you're engaging in more chores, time will go faster. If you wander out in the desert, time will go slower. If you're someone who's very industrious and you try to make as much cheese as possible, you're actually going to have less time in the day than someone who chooses to stand around and do nothing all day. The landmarks are in. Yeah. So this version is pretty much, you know, in terms of content, I think it's pretty much there. So we can actually speed up time. Because I'm wondering if the weather effects and things are important. Most of these are largely the same, you know. I think a lot of it is like, how does she move? How does she interact with things? But I think the idea that she's just basically a silhouette with a pattern inside. In terms of development, like, I think this stage was the hardest because it looks like the finished game, but you know in your head, you know like all the things going on behind the scenes that it's not finished. It's nowhere near finished. Bugs, errors coming out. So that's pre-Golden Master. And then it's just basically fixing it up until we get to Golden Master. Okay, well, we got a bit further, but we've run into another error. And my mouse has stopped working. So this is perfect look into what game dev is actually like. It's like, you know, this is it. There were some people who didn't appreciate it, definitely, which is fine. You know, it was never designed as a game that's for everybody. On Where the Goats Are, there was not a bad word said about it that I heard. So I think I needed to hear from somebody. It's like, look, I don't like this game for these reasons, you know. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's fair enough. Because it's by no means perfect, but you know, if no one tells you your game's not bad, you know, you kind of say, well, maybe it is perfect, you know. So it's definitely good to hear those things. Oh no. Yeah, I need to make a lot of changes in order to get this thing to compile. It's going to take me a while to get out of the mess that I've got myself in. Basically.
you have 5 minutes worth of gameplay in a day, and the sun rises and you do a few things around the farm while you have the sun, and then you send her off to sleep, and then she wakes up and she starts a new day, and you kind of feel like, you do feel like you're dreaming almost.
You know, any individual mechanic or, you know, the art style or whatever by itself is not really enough to really be anything, but I think the premise is the premise, but also the fact that I stuck to the premise and I didn't change it. I think that's what I'm most happy about. Even though, you know, there's a lot of things that I could potentially have done but didn't.